Yo, how's it going, everybody? It's the Masked Man, and before we get into the video, if you are new to the channel, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and turn on the bell notifications. I'm trying to go for 200, maybe 300,000 before the end of 2021. That would be greatly appreciated. Now, usually for the creative process of these videos, I come up with the video topic, the video idea, and then I make the thumbnail accordingly. This time, I did in the exact opposite order. Last night, me and Augie were kind of having a thumbnail battle, I guess, and for the final piece, I just ended up pulling out this. It was definitely inspired from Seth's Kira Batman video, and a lot of people really like this thumbnail, and so I was like, well, now I'm in a little bit of a jiffy because I really had no idea plan for this video, and someone commented below how to write a shonen protagonist, and I thought, you know what? This would actually be an interesting topic to discuss. Again, this would probably be better done as a scripted video, but I think I got it. So I guess now getting right into it. What really goes behind creating a shonen protagonist? The first thing that needs to be understood are the two terms, shonen and protagonist, starting with protagonist. Now this should be a pretty basic term, but it's one people get confused a lot. All because someone's a villain of the story does not mean they are no longer the protagonist. All because they're evil doesn't mean they stop being the protagonist. Understood? Characters like Light from Death Note are great examples of this, of the character being pretty much evil, or you could see as the bad guy of the story in a perspective, but the protagonist is through whom the author is telling the story from. It's the perspective of the character. The antagonist is simply the one who opposes the person's view that we are following. Now, the next thing to understand is shonen. Now, in a video I did before, the truth between shonen and seinen, or shonen versus seinen, I started off the video by calling shonen and seinen genres. That was meant to really kind of get people used to that term, as then I went into my first point saying they're not even genres, they're demographics. Listen, the line between shonen and seinen is a little blurred nowadays with series like Hell's Paradise, Chainsaw Man, Attack on Titan, and then other series within the seinen demographic that are so surprising as to how in the world they're seinen, and that would be things such as Kaguya-sama, maybe One Punch Man. The thing that needs to be understood is shonen and seinen matters with the magazine you are published in and the demographic in which you're targeted for. Usually seinen is targeted for adults, and shonen is targeted more towards young teenagers. So with that being said, the first thing to understand is that when it comes to writing a shonen protagonist, there are no rules when it comes to this. I think that's kind of the first point I really want to get into in terms of concept. One of the things that I hear a lot, and it's very just poopy point versus shonen in general, is generic and cliche. But when you look at the shonen roster a lot of the times, there are lots of different protagonists in the way that it's done. Just that the ones that we're used to, the tropes that we're used to, come from the mainstream animes we watched when we were kids. First we saw Dragon Ball, then we probably branched out to One Piece, Naruto, or Bleach, and now we have the products that we have today. It makes sense that the ones that we see in the frontmost being promoted are the ones that have similar tropes because that's what people buy. But nonetheless, there are still protagonists out there that have been able to kind of branch into the mainstream that very much break the mold of what would be considered typical shonen. Characters like Eren, Denji, Itadori, Ichigo, they're different from what you would usually expect from a shonen protagonist in certain regards. Now, this next point not only applies to shonen protagonists, not only seinen protagonists, but just protagonists in general. Your concept matters, yes, but not nearly as much as the execution of the concept. I hope that's made very clear. Something, again, due to that very just redundantly used generic and cliche, is people need to understand that there's really nothing new under the sun, especially nowadays. There are so many tropes that have already been popularized that it's very difficult to create something without people at a surface level analyzing it and just saying you're copying. Everything takes inspiration from something else, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, it needs to be understood that not only the audience, but the author needs to know that what matters is the execution beyond just those surface level aesthetic similarities or trope similarities. You can look at a character like Asta, who wants to be the Wizard King. You can look at Luffy, who wants to be the Pirate King. You can look at Naruto, who wants to be the Hokage. You have Deku, who wants to be a hero. You can look at all four of these characters and say, oh, generic and cliche, they all have one goal that they strive for. And in my eyes, that's just a very stupid way to look at it, because what matters is the execution of that journey, not necessarily the concept of them having a goal, but how they achieved said goal. You see, there's a lot of people who want to make it to the NBA, but everybody's path to how they get there is very different. Everybody's story is different because not everybody is the same. Yes, they can have similar tropes, similar personality qualities. Again, me explaining earlier that what sells, sells. But when you look at the stories of One Piece, Black Clover, Naruto, My Hero, they're so vastly different in the amount of arcs, the type of antagonists that come out, group antagonist versus singular antagonist, world building, character focus, romantic narratives. Like, the stories are all so different in execution that simply looking at them off of this surface level common trait is just poor to do, and I think will limit you a lot if you're thinking about how to write your own character. Don't worry about the tropes that are already existed. Worry about how you can use this trope to your advantage to make your character and your story even better. Which is why I said there aren't really any rules to writing a shonen protagonist, because I think the real message I want to send in this video personally is just stop thinking of them as shonen protagonists. Think of them as protagonists. Look at series like Claymore, Hunter x Hunter, Attack on Titan, Death Note, Hell's Paradise, Chainsaw Man. These are all series that, in a way, are kind of head-scratching as to how they're shonen for some people. In other words, don't be scared to use tropes that exist, but also don't be scared to break the mold. Because again, it doesn't matter which one you really do, what matters is the execution behind how you do them. Give that character meaning in the story, make them important, dedicate the story to the protagonist. So to kind of continue to drive the point a little more, if the message of your character is to inspire the audience, then make them inspiring, make them a hero, make them a character that we can look up to despite their flaws, that we can support and get behind their journey. Or if you want to make them more relatable, more human, then make them a high schooler who lives a normal life, who's thrown into circumstances beyond his or her control. Now, there are a few criticisms that I have with previous shonen series that you might want to keep in mind. Number one, understand what your series tries to do and stick to that. Do not incorporate other concepts for the sake of just incorporating them if they're going to be thrown in there poorly. Female characters is a great thing. Now, if your protagonist is female, so be it. But I'm talking about more so a series like Naruto here, where in reality, the female characters, their entire narratives or purpose for being most of the time is some sort of romantic necessity with one of the more important characters within the series, i.e. Sakura, Hinata, Ino. Tamari's cool and Tsunade's dope, so with the exception of those two. But in reality, you don't want to just incorporate characters that you're just going to throw to the side and waste valuable screen time on. Now, another aspect that has always bothered me that I notice a lot sometimes is, okay, how do I phrase this? The most important plot within your story is the protagonist's plot, the main narrative of the story. Side character subplots should not be given more importance than the main narrative. And sometimes I notice this because a lot of times, and I think for almost every shonen series out there, we can name a side character that is sort of like a bottle of lightning. They seem to be so well done and so well written in a short amount of time that they outshine the protagonist. Make sure that whatever themes essentially you try to incorporate through your protagonist, whatever concepts, whatever message you're trying to portray to the audience, make sure you execute that to the fullest of potential. That way it doesn't feel like the protagonist falls short in comparison to characters within their own series. I do think the big thing though that does matter, and I will say maybe a little more in the shonen demographic than the seinen demographic, character design. Because look, we already know people tend to look at things from a surface level aesthetic, right? I mean, how many people compared Gojo and Kakashi even though they're nothing alike other than maybe the role they serve within the story? And even that's different. But if your protagonist just looks like the clearance aisle version of Naruto, people are going to automatically make that association. So for an aesthetic thing, make sure you do make your character stand out. And that's not just to avoid comparisons with other series, but that is to really give your own series more of an identity. Again, there are lots of series that you can see clear inspiration from. Plenty of mangakas talk about who inspired them, the author of Black Clover being inspired by Berserk, the author of JJK being inspired by Bleach, and you can clearly see the influences and similarities in certain panels from which they drew that inspiration, which in my eyes is always just a really cool thing. I think a dying art, Roger said this before, is good criticism and good analysis. It's kind of really a dying art, and this could very much affect the way that stories are also written, because so many people try to search for the most complex things within a story, when what matters first are the fundamentals: how you structure an arc, how you integrate themes, how you're supposed to write a protagonist, how you're supposed to write an antagonist, just from a fundamental level. And again, not everything has to be followed to a T, but there are certain ways that stories are written that you can see that they use a good expositional stage, a good conflict, rising action, climax, resolutionary stage within their story, or just miniature arc. If you want to kind of get more as to how or what all that means, I did a video as to where I made the case for why Berserk for me is the greatest manga of all time, and I kind of went in depth on all of the different literary terms that go behind making a story. But hopefully you understood the point of this video. Essentially, the only limit is really your imagination. It really is. You can do almost anything with your character. What matters is how you execute. This is basically just the longer version of that one Russell Westbrook interview where he just kept on repeating execution. Anyways, if you are new to the channel and if you did enjoy this video, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, turn on the bell notifications. That way you're notified whenever a new video pops up on some of your favorite anime, manga, or whatever content. As always, this has been The Masked Man. Hope everyone has a blessed rest of the day, and peace.